I'd like to turn the program over to our National Field Director, Mr. Phil Smith, who's been with the Concord Coalition for a long time, more than 20 years. And Phil has a very special presentation, and we rely on volunteers around the country. We call them fiscal lookouts. They do a great job in their local communities, and it's the core essence of what the Concord Coalition's public education mission is. And Phil is the leader, the head lookout. Phil, you want to come on up?
Thank you, Bob. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before I present the Volunteer of the Year Award, I would like to recognize some of the folks in the room from around the nation who have made a big difference in our field activities this past year. As Bob says, we call them our fiscal lookouts. They're modern-day Paul Reveres. But instead of taking on the red coats, they're taking on the red ink out there, right? So if you'll stand when I call your name: Gail Gerdes, Bobbie Munroe, Joe Maxey, Lieutenant Commander Alex Madden, and John Bohm. Let's give them a round of applause, please. And some late breaking news. I just found out this week that the United States Senate approved a certain promotion that I'd like to brag on one of our fiscal lookouts. And Alex, come Friday, you will no longer be Lieutenant Commander, but you will be Commander Alexander Madden. So congratulations to you for that. So now, as promised, it's time to present our Concord Coalition Tom Rogers Volunteer of the Year Award. This award is named for our late colleague from Raleigh, North Carolina, who served in a number of roles at the Concord Coalition, from local volunteer to state director to regional director. Tom really epitomized what it means to be a leader and a citizen educator. I'm proud to announce that this year's Tom Rogers Volunteer of the Year Award goes to, from the state of Florida, Miss Bobbie Munroe. Bobbie, come on down. Bobbie. Come on up here, Bobbie. So let me present that to you. Will you stand right over here to my right?
I will.
So now I get to brag on her a little bit. She's probably going to tell me to shut up because I have a long presentation. She does. And that's why I take her to Capitol Hill with me all the time. So Bobbie, from an early age, was born to be a Concord Coalition leader. She knew the importance of bipartisanship. From the first time she voted, when she was a student at Rice University, she supported Richard Nixon and Barbara Jordan at the same time. Can you imagine that? So, and Barbara Jordan, by the way, was on the board of the Concord Coalition. How cool is that?
What a perfect choice.
So she's been bipartisan for a really, really long time. And I could see that same bipartisan spirit at work with Bobbie yesterday and today as she and I met with her Florida congressional delegation. She mesmerized the staffers from offices like Marco Rubio to Donna Shalala, asking them, well, actually insisting that they do more on our issues. So Bobbie, thank you for all that you've done. It's been absolutely tremendous working with you. Now, although Bobbie's receiving our Volunteer of the Year Award tonight, it's really been in the works for the past couple of decades. She has served in every imaginable volunteer role for the Concord Coalition, from leading our Fiscal Stewardship Committee in Atlanta to speaking on our behalf at events in the media. When CNN interviewed Bobbie about politicians paying lip service to fiscal responsibility, she said, and I quote, "Take all that political hyperbole, put it in a box, and ship it to China." Now, like many of you in this room tonight, Bobbie has also put her money where her mouth is, and we're grateful to each of you, and we're grateful to Bobbie. So on more than one occasion, she's raised some significant amounts of funds for us, and most recently for this year's Mind Sumo project, where we're attempting new ways to engage young people and college students with our issues. So Bobbie, thank you for being a fiscal lookout. Thank you for all your work with the Concord Coalition, and congratulations for winning the Tom Rogers Volunteer of the Year Award.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. You get a picture?
All right, I'd like to have our panel come up and join us. Bob Kerrey, Maya MacGuineas, and Ken Smetters. as you look at the position that we're in now, the nation's fiscal and economic outlook, what are the issues that you think most concern you that we should be focused on?
It's certainly myopia to come back to the earlier comments. I will say I very much agree with what Mark just said. The role of capitalism in lifting people out of poverty. We see that especially internationally. Even Bono has admitted that capitalism is what's alleviated extreme poverty throughout the world more than any other force. I will augment that and say it's capitalism and tolerance that has been a great force in America. I think we all have our stories of people who have come to this country because it was a tolerant country and accepting. And it made no promises, but allowed people to be creative. In my case, it was escaping anti-Semitism. But we all have those stories, and I think that's the combination of both of those things is a tremendous force, and both are obviously under attack today. What makes me scared is myopia. And that is we're in a lull of, we have demographics, aging, and international capital flows that have led to very low interest rates. This is not sustainable. It kind of reminds me some years ago, it was probably 13, 14 years ago, Ken Rogoff, who's a professor at Harvard, and myself were invited into a company. You may have heard of it, called Lehman Brothers, and at the time was the biggest fixed income house in fact, the world. And we addressed their 75 biggest investors. And it was shocking to me to understand how people, in theory, capital markets are supposed to discipline this myopia, are supposed to stop people from, thinking very myopic about interest rates and getting too comfortable with them. And so I gave Ken talked about the short run. I gave my little spiel about the long run. And then they had a little panel comment, about what I said and so forth. And they said, Professor Smetters, we have a different view. We believe in rational expectations. And that's the Kool-Aid all academics, and the economists agree with, is rational expectations. And I said, okay, define what you mean by that. And they said, we jump when everybody else jumps. And which is just the opposite of rational expectations. That is like myopic expectations. At the time, I didn't have tenure. Ken Rogoff, a very esteemed person, had tenure and got up and just correctly berated them for how their outlook at life. And it was shocking to me. These are the most sophisticated institutional investors, the biggest 75 investors really in the world in terms of fixed income. And that was their view, and how does myopia persist like that? And the fact of the matter is, if we could be promised that the current interest rate environment were to persist forever, that would be, we would start to call into question our basic economic theories known as the no Ponzi game condition and things that we use to close our models. But in fact, it's not going to persist. And there's just an incredible myopia right now that's happening in the capital markets, I think, about this. And that's the thing that keeps me up.
Maya?
Okay, well, first let me just say I want to lend my also thanks and appreciation to the Concord Coalition, which is just a phenomenal organization and a place where I got my start in fiscal policy when I interned there for a summer and just kept coming back and doing work there and was inspired by all the leaders who started it. And then second, I want to lend my thanks and appreciation to Mark, who is deserving of this award for so many reasons, I think. But Kerrey Danforth was a tremendous commission. I remember being glued to it and thinking that the report had all the solutions, and you look back, and it still does. And secondly, I think the points about capitalism are so important. We're actually running a whole project on the future of capitalism, which is critical to partnering with all the things that we're trying to do. And right now, at a moment where we're so kind of struck and confused about the path forward, we do not want to throw the things that are great and work about this country out just because we need to update a bunch of the different systems and fix what we're addressing. And so it's so important what the BRT has done and the partnership for the greater I mean, Greater Washington Partnership, which is something that you're working on. There's so many examples of where this is working that you are really in the forefront of, and I admire it tremendously. I think after that speech, though, the thing that I most admire, because I do this every day, give talks on the budget, is how perfect that speech was, and that I actually don't feel like tossing myself out of the window, which is normally what happens. Like, and so now I'm going to prove that I can't do that, because when I talk about what I worry about the most, I don't end on, like, I feel inspired by you, and terrified by the things that keep me up at night. But so I think the thing that
A true patriot, ladies and gentlemen. All right.
So the thing that keeps me up the most is the dysfunction that we have right now that is keeping us from solving any of our problems. And I know that my job is to worry about the national debt, and I worry about it tremendously. But one of the many reasons that I worry about it is because it stands in the way of us addressing all the other things that we also need to deal with. We need to be a country that is investing in human capital and public investments in a massive way that's preparing us for a much more competitive environment than we've ever faced. We need to be starting to understand that the pace of change that we're going through as a country, an economy, and a globe are much faster than ever before. We need to understand that our social contract was created for the last century instead of the existing century. And there's so many things that we need to be changing and updating to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming along with globalization and technology and all the innovations that are happening. But our fiscal constraints are not allowing us to think that way. And so what I'm incredibly concerned about is that our political hyper-partisanship, massive tension, the divides, the distractions that we are all feeling. So we are not looking at the future, but we're kind of so busy fighting and honestly believing that people who think differently than we do are bad and evil. Like the divides that are coming in this country are much deeper than I've seen or felt before. And so what keeps me awake at night is that we have become so divisive, we are not able to tackle all these problems, which we know how to fix. They are not beyond our capacity to fix, but we are not focusing on the right issues. And the bottom line is our inability to be honest about the fiscal challenges, which is just, it's the foundation of how we address these, means that we will not be able to put the policies in place that prepare us to stay the leader of the free world, which we can and should be able to do. So, see, I'm not that inspiring. I know, like, you said it in a way where I was like, we can do this, and then I'm back to being depressed. So I hope you'll bring us back
Don't
up.
sell yourself short. Bob Kerrey came back just to hear you. So, I mean, Bob, I had asked people, have a microphone on me. I had asked people, we had already consensus that Mark had given a brilliant speech, and that was, and that, but I wanted to know what sort of, what keeps you up at night about the fiscal and economic outlook? What things are we not thinking about that we should be thinking about?
Well, nothing keeps me up at night.
Oh, good.
Just 'cause, you know, other than clumsily walking up the stairs. So, look, my little history. My father was an orphan and grew up in Chicago. So anybody who was famous in Chicago, he knew, and things that they said he knew. And he claimed that Clarence Darrow once said, at the moment he was trying to decide whether to defend Leopold and Loeb for a murder they had done to their cousin Bobbie Franks, that he had grown weary of standing on the thin and lonely line that separates the good from the most destructive force in America, public opinion. And it's true. I mean, if anyone in this room said, I'd like to run for Senate in Iowa, let's say, but you haven't decided whether or not you want to be a Republican or Democrat, I could take you as a Republican into a room of 1,000 Republicans and give you a speech that would get you a standing ovation. Then I can take you into a room of 1,000 Democrats and give you a speech that would get you a standing ovation. And you say, God, I love getting a standing ovation, by the way. It's better than booze. You know, it's human nature. You'd rather be applauded. The problem with both speeches is they're both lies. I'd say to the Republicans, we got to get the government out of health care, and I'd say to the Democrats, you're all entitled to high-quality health care as a right. And you'd get a loud round of applause at both. If I went into the room, on the other hand, and told them the truth to the discussion about health care, which is in Nebraska, as in the nation, in 1990, 10% of our adults were obese. Now, you can't blame that on the insurance company, and you can't blame that on CMS. We worked real hard to make America great again. In 2000, 20% of us were obese. And last year it was 33%. We have 26% of the people in the military who are obese. At least, I don't know what the number would be. Some, you know, I haven't been out of politics that long, Bob. You probably noticed from time to time I would do this. 78.6% of all statistics are made up on the spot. And I'm going to make one up. I would guess that 30% of all healthcare spending is on preventable metabolic diseases. You're not going to get a round of applause for that. You're not going to get to, oh, that's great. I've got to do something myself that I don't want to do, which is change the way I eat, change my habits of living. But it's a fact, and it's a big challenge, I think, in politics, which is human nature. It's not that they're bad people. Some of them are. It's not that they're bad people. It's that they prefer to be liked. And you don't get liked all the time by telling people they got to do something they don't want to do. And I remember, to close on this, I was elected governor in 1982, and the Republicans in the Senate took a position that we ought to have a one-year freeze on the COLA for Social Security. And if you look at the way Social Security has been changed since the end of the Second World War, I think, oh my God, it's pretty dramatic. I mean, anyway, so we're going to have a one-year freeze on the COLA. I wrote a letter in support of it. And when I ran for Senate in '88, I heard about it. It was like I was saying to seniors, you're going to be foraging in the alley for food? I don't think so. I mean, it's been a great program, Social Security and Medicare, because we've lowered the poverty rate of people over the age of 65. But at some point, you got to be willing to tell people over the age of 65, it's easier now that I am. It's too much. We're robbing from the future to pay for the past. That's what we're doing. It's just that that's not a great applause line to either a Democratic or a Republican audience.
Well, we've got political dysfunction and myopia and...
But Bob, I don't think it is dysfunction.
No, it's rational, what you're saying.
Totally rational. Yeah. I mean, there are two kinds of people. Most of you, I think, are probably close enough to Washington to understand this. There are two kinds of people here in elected office. People who can count and people who lose. And, you know, and it's not nothing wrong with somebody saying, I want to win this election. Unfortunately, it means that the country puts itself in a position where you look at the facts. Bob puts out the facts. I mean, you put out the facts. You look at the factual analysis that you did earlier today, and you said, we got to change. It's not sustainable. Well, unfortunately, we have to start rewarding people who are telling us the truth. And not just criticizing those who are lying to us, but rewarding those people who are telling us the truth.
We were, actually, Maya and I were at another dinner last night, which shows something about what we were talking about this issue about Maya had organized this dinner with a small group of people that were all in the advocacy world, not just budget, but other things, and that were running up against this frustrating situation of finding solutions, but then not being able to sell them because they might be hard choices, even rational hard choices.
I'm going to hog this discussion one more time, because
okay.
I got to know Paul Tsongas very well, and Warren Rubin very well. And both of them used to say the same thing in many ways, which is, do you know what the people who signed the Declaration of Independence pledged? Not much. Their lives, their fortune, and their sacred honor. Other than that, and we talk about how wonderful they were, and we come into this damn thing and we're, oh God, it's going to cost me $100 on my COLA, and I can't do it. No, I mean, both Paul and Warren talked about economic patriotism, and that's the nature of the award this evening, and we got to call it out on people.
Well, that might be that might be the insight, because I didn't quite get from Maya. We were having this discussion, and Maya was listening to people talk and said, you know, I'm synthesizing all this, and I think I'm getting a sense of what the solutions are here. And just at that point, the fire alarm went off. And like any good host, Maya went running out of the room to figure out what was going on and came back, and instead of giving us her solution, she said, "We've all got to get out of here."
I mean, that's not quite true. I came back 7 times and said, "Don't worry, it's fine." And then the 8th time I said, "Oops, I'm wrong. Get the hell out. The club is on fire." So
and then she got us,
that's how good a host I am.
to a bar, which was good. So, but anyway, what was the solution that I never heard last night? The synthesis that seems to be coming out of this discussion as well.
Well, okay, so actually, I've reversed myself completely since last night. I just told Mark this story. I told Mark and his
can't wait till tomorrow.
family. Yeah. I told Mark and his family this story recently. Mark and I have spent a lot of time bonding about how we love our jobs and our careers, but really what we've loved is being parents and how wonderful parenting is, and we have these terrific kids. And then I kind of fessed up that I've got teenagers who have just become rotten human beings to the point where this morning I asked my child to get the won't swear but hell out of my car. And so I'm thinking we should just leave a debt to the teenagers of this country because they kind of suck. But this is not videotaped, right? And this is off the record. So that's my realization for the day. But where I was last night when we were talking about this is there's a really interesting approach. So in addition to the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget and Fix the Debt, we have started a new project that basically comes from the realization that you're not going to be able to fix the debt until we can fix the underlying problems in the country. And my colleague Mike Murphy, who's sitting over there, is running this project called Fix Us. And we're thinking about what the root causes are that brought us here. And so we brought together a lot of advocates who are working on issues, whether it's climate or immigration or education or veterans issues, who are bumping up against a wall of dysfunction. And what are we going to do about it? So one of the things that I think we were coming to right before the smoke started coming up where we were dining was that first you have to bring in so many different audiences to this issue and realize that we all have a stake in this. So it's not just fiscal issues, it's not just any of these policy issues, it is the process that gets us there. But I think we're going to need a whole new process of engagement because one of the problems that has happened is people are feeling so alienated from the process of politics. They're feeling that they're not a part of it. We were working on how you're going to understand the problems that got us, this country, to where we are right now, whether they're political, economic, cultural, the huge pace of change, the different generational perspectives that are going on. All of them contribute to it. But in order to get a fix, to figure out how we're going to address what's going on here, we're going to have a way to get this huge group of people who are feeling more and more alienated back involved in the process. And so what I thought from what we were talking about last night was that there are a bunch of people who reach different audiences and realize that it's not the policies they have a problem with, it's the message and how they are made to feel from our leaders right now. And bringing in a new way that we can engage people, I think is going to be the first step in coming up with a platform of fixes that will allow us to work on these policies. So it was half-baked when the fire alarm came, but I am convinced that this is not just a bunch of us in Washington coming up with solutions, but that this is the kind of thing that you do, Bob, a lot, but go out in the country and talk to people and really have listening tours and understand what issues people are thinking about. And you had talked about how when people compromise on your budget exercise, they leave feeling so much better, not because they got everything that they wanted, but because they understood the people with different opinions and were able to compromise. And I think we have to go back to creating that feeling in our communities and our policy-making process.
Well, one way that might help with that, and we get this all the time, and I know you do too, and I'm going to turn to Kent on this, is, you know, people say you have to make this real for me today. I mean, if I don't know how the budget deficit or the debt affects me today, I can't care about it. And my response to that is usually, if you don't care about the future of your country, there's nothing much I can do for you. But I know part of what the mission of the Penn Wharton budget model is, or maybe one of the aspirations, is to try to explain in more practical terms, maybe to people in more personal terms. Could you expound on that a little bit? Is that possible? Is that a goal that's possible?
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure we're actually doing a great job at that. We're incredibly deep modelers and things like that. That's proven our communication, actually personalizing what we do is something that we have to improve on. And let me come back to, I think, a related issue that's been discussed, and that is, it's not just the formal debt that we're, the priced debt that we're leaving to future generations. There's a lot of a non-priced debt that we're leaving in the form, now, it's not speaking so much in terms of my role in the Penn Wharton budget model, just professor at Wharton, and that is, we're leaving a lot of carbon debt to the future generations. We're leaving a lot of environmental risk to the future generations and things like that. And I think it's too myopic to just focus on one specific measure. I think we need a holistic approach. When you think about the issue about carbon, for example, there is a very big debt that we're leaving, intergenerational debt there, that's not currently being priced. And whenever anybody has a philosophy about anything, you should always ask yourself a question: what is my cost of being wrong? Suppose I'm wrong about something. What is the cost of that position? If you believe carbon's not a big issue and you're wrong, that cost is much bigger, according to every model that we know about, than if you in fact think it's a problem and it turns out not to be a problem. And there's costs there too, because mitigation is costly and so forth. And so we have to ask those questions of what economists refer to as the type 1 versus type 2 error. In this case, the type 2 error is much, much bigger than the type 1. And that's an opportunity that you have a double play there. If we had the courage to deal with that issue, I don't know a single Republican economist who is opposed to the carbon tax. Marty Feldstein, Greg Mankiw, Glenn Hubbard, and with that, you could use that unpriced debt, you could use that to start to pay down some of the explicit debt. There truly is a double dividend there. And it's just, to me, that seems like the most obvious opportunity. You could use that to pay for infrastructure improvements. You could use that to pay for other things. And so, it is true that requires incredible international coordination. And it is true, there's an ultimate prisoner's dilemma game where the dominant strategy is to hope everybody else does it. So it requires incredible statesmanship internationally as well. But there is very little question in my mind that is a big opportunity to explore.
Well, Mark, the time has come. I'm going to give you the opportunity to have the last word, a note of optimism, or to send the congregation on their way.
Thank you and good night. No, so I would just say two words of optimism. First of all, the one thing that is absolutely certain that will not fix the problem is if we all just ignore it and go home and pretend like we can't do anything to fix it. And that's why the Concord Coalition is so important in the efforts that we do. It may sound today like it's a lone voice in the wilderness, but next year it'll be 2 and then 3 and then 5, and certainly then we're going to have a majority, because their day will come when we're going to have to do something. What Alan Greenspan said during the Entitlement Commission, to answer your question about all these problems in the future, what brings it back to today, he said interest rates will. He said when the people understand how bad the situation is, interest rates will bring the problem back today, and we don't feel that today because they're so low. They will skyrocket. We better have the solutions ready when the opportunity arises. So we can't wait and say, woe is me, we're a victim, we can't do anything. Work on the solutions, as Maya was talking about. Get ready for the day. Time will come. We need to be prepared. And the last point of optimism, I had 4 teenagers. I know exactly what you were talking about. Then, my daughter turns 24. My other son turns 21, and my twins are now 20. Hallelujah! I would do anything in the world to provide a better future for them. There is light at the end of that tunnel, too. So there's absolute optimism, and keep fighting. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.